everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here for our DFS fades and sleepers for the Memorial Tournament. This is the most important video of the week. Of course, ownership has matured, and as the week has gone on, now I have an idea of some of the quote-unquote overhyped plays or my fades for this week, and some of those diamonds in the rough, the guys being a little bit overlooked in terms of ownership, our sleeper picks. The goal here is to use the game theory aspect of DFS to help identify some of the best plays and quote-unquote worst plays of the slate. If you're talking about a chalky player, and by chalk, I'm talking about a relatively high projected player in terms of their ownership, you want to avoid that if they're not projecting at least as highly as you're hoping. And for our sleeper picks, they're guys that the field is quote-unquote sleeping on. They project well, they have good course history. Whatever the case is, they are some of the more valuable plays that you can go to here for this contest. So with all of that in mind, a lot to get into. Let's start it off with our fades of the week. Our first fade this week is somebody who's had a ton of success around Muirfield Village, but is coming in with some pretty shaky form and definitely burned a lot of people, including myself, at the PGA Championship. That is Patrick Cantlay, as we're going to call him here in this video. He's somebody who isn't very high on a lot of people's radars right now. It wasn't just myself that get burned by that. It was a majority of the industry, to be quite frank with you. And in terms of the recent form, there are quite a few things to worry about. So first and foremost, the putter, which is his biggest weapon. I mean, what he usually relies on week in and week out has not been there. In fact, he's losing over half a stroke per round, 0.6 of a stroke per round, actually, which is very surprising to see from a Patrick Cantlay. He's, again, usually one of the better short game players we have on tour. And if he's not going to have his best asset, I really worry about the guy because, you know, in terms of his approach play, his off the tee play, while it's solid, it's not elite level stuff. He's not gaining a ton of strokes off the tee and on approach like somebody like Rory McIlroy. He's not gaining over a stroke off the tee like somebody like a John Rahm. And even somebody like a Xander Schauffele, who's gaining 0.6 shots per round with his approach play, I'd much prefer to a Patrick Cantlay at this point. So, you know, the recent form has really held him back. You've seen that with his results. They've been volatile. He has that missed cut. Of course, he won the team event, which I don't think we can put all that much to stock into, but did have the nice finish at the Heritage, but a middling performance at the Masters. And if there's any finishes I'm really going to put a lot of stock into here, it's going to be that PGA Championship because you have the long rough at Southern Hills. You also had relatively undulated, fast, bent grass greens. So I think there's quite a bit of parallels to be made between those venues. And of course, the Masters. We also have fast, bent grass, undulating greens where he also has tended to kind of falter over the years. So even though the course history is the best that you could possibly imagine, multiple wins over his last 4 years, a top 5 finish there in 2018, I worry about how sustainable that is, particularly if he's coming in with the form that he is. In terms of recent form rank, he's number 59 in the field, which for somebody in this elite tier range is unheard of, right? The lowest ranked guy after that is a Daniel Berger, and he was dealing with injury concerns for quite a few of those last 24 rounds. So for me, if we're going to have to find anybody to avoid up top, is going to be the guy coming in with the worst recent form. And for this slate specifically, that is going to be a Patrick Cantlay. So I understand the course history is there. If you're a course history buff, you're probably playing Patrick Cantlay this week. But if you've been following the channel, my data-driven approach that I use to making my picks here, course history, while it is a part of my process, it is not the end-all, be-all. When it comes to course fit, of course, that putting is what we need to be there. That really worries me of late. And one thing about Patrick Cantlay, too, is that major championships specifically, it's not just a trend at this point, it's a well-established pattern. He tends to fold. He doesn't like difficult conditions. And outside of this tournament specifically, he has really struggled when tournaments have gone difficult. So in terms of the larger sample size, it points to him perhaps having a little bit of a disappointing week here. And year in and year out, you have that piece of chalk up top that ends up missing the cut. Would not surprise me at all if that was Patrick Cantlay here. So defending champion or not, asterisk or not on that win last year. Maybe the golf gods, the karma has a little bit to say about it this year, and he doesn't end up having that win. So he'll be a fade for me. I have him at 14.9% projected ownership, so it's not anything drastic right now, but just given the form that he's in at this point, probably would have projected him to come in even lower than that. So going to be somebody that I'm avoiding in my DFS contest. Next up, we have Viktor Hovland, and this should not surprise you if you've been watching this channel for the last few months. He's somebody who, under difficult conditions, really tends to fold. And there's a very easy answer to why that happens. It's not as much of a question mark as it is with Patrick Cantlay. I think a lot of people would have expected Cantlay to have won a major by this point, or at the very least have contended for a major at this point. Viktor Hovland, it makes a lot more sense. He deals with issues around the green. It's not just issues around the green, it's issues with a capital I, all caps there. He's one of the worst players around the green on the PGA Tour. The larger sample size you give him, if we go to the last 50 measured rounds, it gets even worse. He's losing over half a stroke per round in that category. Everywhere else, he's going to be solid, especially from the off the tee and the approach categories, going to be usually in like the top 10 of the field. But of late, he hasn't been that sharp. In fact, he's just gaining over a third of a stroke per round off the tee. While he is gaining over half a stroke per round on approach, you'd expect a lot more from Viktor Hovland. I mean, the fact that Jordan Spieth is beating him in both categories is kind of shows you where his game's at this point, right? You'd expect a lot more from Hovland, closer to at least maybe 3/4 of a stroke per round when he's coming in with solid form. So given his struggles around the green, his struggles at difficult golf courses, he's not the best bent grass putter. You can see he's slightly worse than his baseline on the bent grass surface. And given the recent form, which hasn't been all that impressive either, I mean, top 25 finished last week, but kind of came out of nowhere, was never in contention. He just hardly made the cut at the PGA. Zurich Classic, hardly made the cut. 27th at the Masters, just has not impressed. And a lot of these golf courses that he's played, I mean, specifically the Charles Schwab PGA Championship and Masters, are very similar to the type of greens and the course that we're going to see this week. So if he hasn't been able to succeed in those last 3 starts, what are we to expect that to change this time around? So it does surprise me that he's 17% projected owned. I would have expected that to be a lot lower, maybe in that 10 to 11% range. So that's why he's going to be a full fade for me this week. I just, if he was coming in super low owned, if he had shown any semblance of form over the last few weeks, maybe I'd be willing to take a chance on him at a difficult golf course, but certainly not if he's going to be one of the more popular plays in this portion of the price board. And lastly, the last guy we're fading is Max Homa. And I think he's getting a lot of steam this week because of his performance at the Genesis Invitational. Of course, won there in a playoff over Tony Finau at the Wells Fargo, got that win a few weeks ago, so obviously is coming in with decent form. But last week was pretty disappointing, right? He was a fade for us, just ended up kind of getting by. I believe finished in like the 30s. So we take a look at that. He finished in 23rd place, completely backdoored that because it was in the 40s or 50s to start Sunday's round. It was never really in contention. Even at the PGA Championship, when he finished in 13th, he never really was a part of the, at least top of the leaderboard at that tournament. So even though he's coming in with some really solid form, I think it's a little bit overblown, particularly when you take a look at his skill set. He's somebody who gains a ton of strokes off the tee and on approach. He's a very streaky putter, and of late, of course, has had that hot putter, but he's always pretty bad around the green. I mean, he leaks strokes there from time to time. And of late, you can see that has been the case. At a golf course like Muirfield Village, that's going to be a problem. I mean, that's why we're fading a guy like Viktor Hovland. Max Homa is not immune to that issue either. So if he's going to be leaking strokes around the green, that is going to be a problem for me. The recent form, again, has been a little bit shaky. I think he's a little bit overblown over his last 2 starts. The win speaks for itself, but 48th at the Masters, again, another course that I really comped to this week. And if we take a look at the course history, he did have a solid finish the last time out, but it was a missed cut in 2020, a 37th finish in there in 2019. So has shown that volatility in the past here. So he's going to be nearly the same amount of ownership as somebody like a Cameron Young, where it's just right around 3% between them. I'm going to go to Young all day. I mean, Young has finished like 3rd, 2nd, and 3rd his last 3 finishes. I mean, just an absolutely incredible run of golf. And Cameron Young, unlike a Max Homa, is gaining a ton of strokes around the green. Right, so he has that similar skill set from the ball striking perspective, but they flip-flop the around the green in the putting category. And the one thing you can kind of get away with at this golf course is not being the best putter, particularly when just to begin with, you're not the best putter. You're not really going to carry your game with your putter with a Cameron Young. Whereas a Max Homa, he gains a ton of strokes when he's on his game with that flat stick. So I worry about that, particularly at a golf course that doesn't prioritize the putting game. So that's going to be our last fade. Now moving over to the sleeper picks, where our first sleeper is going to be Collin Morikawa. And for Morikawa to be a sleeper pick at this venue makes no sense. He should be extremely popular, and to this point, it's probably the most surprising ownership number that I saw on the entire board. So just 13.2% right now. And I think what people forget is that in 2020, he not only won the workday, which was at the Muirfield, the next week he lost in a playoff, that literal next week at the same golf course. He, of course, had another solid finish the year after that, finishing in a playoff. I mean, just 2 second-place finishes, a win at this golf course. If you take a look at some of the other course history, I mean, the guy has shown up in all of his starts here. He made the cut his first time here in 2020. Just ridiculous stuff from the young kid. So even with just a small sample size at this golf course, has shown more than enough ability to putt on these greens. And that shouldn't be a surprise based on his bent grass putting splits, where he's close to 0.4 shots better per round on bent grass than any other surface. So I think that really shouldn't surprise us all that much. We take a look at the recent form, you'll see that he's had a pretty good stretch of golf here, a bunch of made cuts. While it hasn't been anything flashy outside of the Masters, that is the one golf course I am comping a lot more this week than I would at other courses, right? Because the greens are all that much similar. And if you remember on Sunday, him and Rory McIlroy made that charge up the leaderboard, and a lot of that was fed by Collin Morikawa's putter. It came alive there on Sunday. He started to really find his groove, and if he can try to carry some of that momentum into this event, the ball striking last week was unbelievable at the Charles Schwab. I mean, even at the PGA Championship, was hitting the ball pretty darn well. I expect him to really have some upside here. So you can see, even at those events, without the putter, he wasn't able to do all that much, but that's kind of Collin Morikawa's game, right? If he doesn't have the putter, he's probably just going to make the cut and kind of get by, but when he brings that putter to the table, watch out, you're looking at somebody who's going to be borderline unbeatable out there. So at $10,400, I think he has a lot more upside than people are giving him credit for, and again, I'm surprised about the ownership number. I thought he'd be extremely popular given a lot of the course history. It's not on par with a Patrick Cantlay or a John Rahm, but it's a close second, right, in his small sample size. Something else I'll say about Collin is he also won the workday last year, and that was at another Nicklaus design. While it wasn't up there at Muirfield Village, that was at the Concession, which another comp course for this week. In fact, if you go to Data Golf and look at some of their top comp courses, it's the number one that they have. So that's another just feather in his cap there for sure. From a skill set perspective, we know he's accurate off the tee, going to gain a ton of strokes in that category. So take a look at that. He's gaining there. He's gaining close to a stroke per round with the approach play. Like I said, is really getting dialed in that category. And if he can go out there and be a solid putter like we've seen at Muirfield Village over the years, could very well take home another champion. I should say his first championship at this event, his second championship at this venue for his career. All right, our second sleeper is going to be Will Zalatoris at $9,400. A similar player to Collin Morikawa, where he struggles with the putter, tends to do most of his work with the tee to green play. So you would expect him to be popular this week, but he's not. Just 12.8% owned when it comes to our projected ownership. So he's number 7 in my total mono ranking, number 3 with Muirfield Village fit, which makes perfect sense when we consider his finishes at the Masters and, of course, the PGA Championship at Southern Hills. Both golf courses have fast, undulating bent grass greens, and he's found a way for whatever reason in his career to gain a ton of strokes at those type of golf courses. We get that same type of setup this week at Muirfield Village. It's also a golf course with long rough, really prioritizes the ball striking, so everything is pointing towards Will Zalatoris having a solid week here. If we take a look at the course history, surprisingly, he has played here before, and I thought it was a mistake when I was importing my data here, but he played here in 2018 after winning a nationwide tour event in 2017 to get into it. Missed the cut there. Will Zalatoris is a much different player now than he is in the past, but if anything, those 2 rounds of experience are going to help him, and the practice rounds that he had that week to try and prepare there, he's going to be, if anything, slightly more prepared than the rest of the field, though there has been a renovation since then. So maybe it's not the biggest help to him, but course history hasn't really been there. The recent form, though, has been unbelievable for Will Zalatoris. So, I mean, it's been a little bit up and down, but 2nd place at the PGA, top 5 at the Zurich, 6th place at the Masters, which is a corollary course that I'm using quite heavily, as we've talked about. Just And a lot of things pointing to him having some success. The shots gain metrics are also very solid for a Will Zalatoris, gaining significantly off the tee. In fact, gaining across all 4 stat categories. And if we go to the last 50 measured rounds, it really only gets better. He's gaining even more significantly off the tee and on approach, still gaining around the green and right around a neutral with the putter. So if he's going to go out there and gain in bunches on these fast bent grass greens, continue to play solid from tee to green like he has over his last 24 rounds, I expect him to go up there and finish in the top 10. Now, the one huge X factor here is the short putting. The reason why he's gaining with the flat stick of late, which is perhaps the most surprising part about his last 24 measured rounds, is because he started to make those 3 to 4 footers. The stroke that looks so solid from that 15 plus foot range is starting to translate now to those short putts. And I really think that's the X factor and really what's going to propel him to that next level. If he can start to make the short putts, kind of like a Jordan Spieth who throws those away from time to time, that's when he can win golf tournaments, because with his tee to green play, he's always going to be there in contention. He's always going to have a sniff of that lead because he's never really going to be in trouble. And at a difficult track is exactly what we're looking for. So I like the floor, but I also really like the upside there, given the fact that he's had so much success on greens like these. Next up, we've got Joaquin Niemann as our last sleeper. And in terms of the modeling, he's another absolute flusher, right? Going to gain a ton of strokes off the tee. The approach play is usually going to be there for the young Chilean. And the reason why I like him, especially a little bit more this week, is his success at the Genesis Invitational. Another really difficult track. You got to hit fairways, you got to hit greens. And when you miss greens, you got to have a lot of creativity to get up and down. So he definitely checks that box for us. The recent form metrics are also ideal. You can see he's gaining a ton of strokes off the tee, gaining around the green and with the putter. The one real issue, I would say, would be the approach play, where he's been very inconsistent. Now, if we take a look at the last 50 rounds, that inconsistency kind of gets washed away, right? Still gaining off the tee, around the green, around approach and with the putter, so gaining across all 4 categories, but certainly has to bring the irons this time around. And maybe that's why the ownership is lower than it should be, why he's there at 11.6%. But when he brings the irons to the table, I mean, this kid's upside is just, it's unbelievable, right? It's top 10 upside, winning upside. We've seen that multiple times here on tour already to this point of his career. And at $8,300, he fits into a ton of lineups. It's a more than flexible enough price tag. He's got more than enough upside for us. And, of course, Corey Connors, I love this week. He's coming in right around the same amount of ownership, right? So it's not like you're getting a huge price ownership decrease by going his direction. But in terms of upside, I'd say that Joaquin Niemann's upside is higher than Corey Connors, right? Corey Connors is more of a cut-making machine, a very safe play on this slate. You can see that the projected cut rate for Corey Connors is a little bit higher than Joaquin Niemann, but the ceiling for Joaquin Niemann is maybe a solid 20 to 30 points higher than it is for a Corey Connors. So it's all dependent on the type of contest that you're going and entering. But for these large field GPPs, we're looking to beat 30 to 90,000 other entries. I think he's a guy that you should be more than considering. All right, that's all I've got for the fades and sleepers. Before you hop on out of here, let me know down in the comments who you're fading and who you're taking as your sleeper picks. Tomorrow, look out for our DFS live stream that will be at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure to stop on by with your questions. We'll be touching on the weather, by player poll projections, all that sort of fun stuff to get you prepared for this week. If you haven't already smashed the like button, make sure you go ahead and do that before you hop on out of here too. I appreciate all the support here, guys. Best of luck with all of your lineups for this week, and let's get this cash.